He came begging her for shelter for his disabled little girl, and the world saw a simple act of charity, a woman opening her doors to the desperate. But the truth, as often happens, was far less pristine, more tangled in the thorny vines of a shared, unspoken history, a narrative steeped in shadows and the heavy weight of choices made long ago. This wasn't a story of immediate grace, but of a grudging obligation, a raw wound prodded open, revealing scars that refused to fade. It began, as all such tales do, not with a flourish but with a stark, brutal need. A father, gaunt and broken, stood before a weathered door, the wind whipping his threadbare coat, his plea a ragged whisper against the bleak silence of a forgotten hollow. His small daughter, nestled in his arms, was a fragile, silent testament to a world that offered little mercy, her slight form a delicate counterpoint to the harsh landscape. The woman who eventually opened the door, Ilara, was not soft. Her eyes, the color of storm clouds, held a weariness that went bone deep, a hardness forged in the crucible of too many disappointments. She saw not just a man and his child, but a ghost, a reminder of a past she had painstakingly tried to bury beneath layers of ice and indifference. The air crackled with a tension thicker than the gathering dusk, each breath a silent negotiation between past and present, between a desperate plea and a stubborn, wounded heart. Her gaze, cold and unyielding, swept over the man, Elias lingering on the small bundle he clutched. The unspoken question in her eyes was not, "Why here?" but "Why now?" A question that carried the weight of years and untold sorrows. This was no stranger, no random encounter. This was a reckoning disguised as an appeal for sanctuary, a bitter echo from a life she had thought safely compartmentalized. The wind howled a lament, and the small, disabled girl stirred in her father's arms. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, yet it cut through the thick air, a tiny, piercing note in the unfolding drama, forcing the woman to confront not only the specter of her past but the fragile hope of a desperate present. It was a moment poised on the precipice, a decision that would unravel not just their immediate fate, but the very fabric of their carefully constructed realities. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. Ilara's silence was a wall, unyielding and formidable. Yet beneath its surface, a hurricane of conflicting emotions churned. The man, Elias, swallowed hard, his eyes pleading, tracing the sharp lines of her face, searching for any flicker of the woman he once knew, the woman she perhaps still was, buried beneath layers of hardened cynicism. He spoke of the bitter cold, of Lily's failing health, of nowhere else to turn, his voice a low, desperate drone against the howling wind. He made no mention of their shared history, the gaping chasm of years and betrayals that lay between them, understanding instinctively that to do so would shatter the fragile possibility of even this meager plea. Ilara's gaze, however, was fixed on Lily, the small, pale face emerging from the folds of the worn blanket, a face untouched by the cruelties that had shaped their own lives. Lily's eyes, wide and unnervingly bright, seemed to hold an innocence that Ilara hadn't encountered in decades, an innocence that both repelled and drew her in. It was a strange magnet, pulling at the calcified layers around her heart. A cold, hard calculation entered Ilara's eyes, a practical assessment devoid of sentiment. She could not, would not, house him. That much was certain. But the girl was different. The girl represented an opportunity, a strange, twisted form of leverage, perhaps, or merely a reflection of a path not taken, a bitter reminder of her own lost innocence. The words, when they finally came, were blunt, scraped raw by years of disuse, devoid of any warmth. "The girl," Ilara stated, her voice like grinding stone. "Only the girl. You, Elias, stay out there." The refusal was absolute. A door slammed shut on the past, yet the creak of it opening just enough for the child was a concession that tore at the very fabric of her hardened existence. Elias flinched, a raw wound exposed, but nodded, desperation overriding pride. It was more than he could have hoped for, less than he needed. He gently placed Lily into Ilara's stiff, unyielding arms, a profound trust extended to a woman who had, in another lifetime, broken his heart and his spirit. The child was impossibly light, a fragile bird in Ilara's arms, and a faint tremor ran through her, a visceral reaction she fought to suppress. This wasn't charity, it was a debt, a complex exchange whose terms were yet to be fully defined. She watched Elias turn, his silhouette merging with the desolate landscape, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than his presence, leaving her with the fragile burden of a child and the unsettling echoes of a past she had promised herself she would never revisit. The door clicked shut, sealing them in, two souls bound by an invisible thread, one a vibrant, innocent flicker, the other a burnt-out ember, now forced into an uneasy proximity. The first days with Lily were a stark landscape of discomfort for Alara, each moment a jarring reminder of a tenderness she believed long dead. The small cottage, once a fortress of solitude, now echoed with the faint sounds of a child's breathing, a fragile heartbeat that permeated the silence. Lily was a creature of quiet resilience, her disability rendering her almost entirely dependent, yet her wide, observant eyes missed nothing. She did not cry, did not complain. She simply existed, a testament to pure vulnerability. Alara found herself moving through her days with a new, unsettling awareness, her practiced indifference cracking at the edges. The girl's presence was a mirror, reflecting back to Alara not just her current hardness, but the ghost of her own lost childhood, a past she guarded with a fierce, almost savage protectiveness. There were moments, fleeting and unwelcome, when a memory would surface, unbidden. The soft light of a distant summer afternoon, the gentle hand of a mother, the carefree laughter that had once been her own. These shards of memory, sharp and poignant, pricked at the armor she had so painstakingly constructed over the decades. She found herself watching Lily sleep, the rise and fall of her chest a steady rhythm in the quiet house, and felt a strange, unfamiliar ache in her own chest, a sensation she immediately tried to intellectualize, to dismiss as mere inconvenience. Lily's disability was not just a physical limitation. It was a profound, unspoken language. It communicated absolute trust, absolute reliance, a raw need that Alara, for all her cynicism, found herself unable to completely ignore. The simplest tasks, feeding, changing, lifting the feather-light body, became rituals, stripped of all sentimentality, yet imbued with an underlying, almost imperceptible thread of reluctant care. It was not kindness, not yet. It was a grim determination, a commitment born not of affection, but of a deeper, more complex entanglement with the girl's father, a ghost that permeated the very air they breathed. Alara caught herself more than once, pausing at the threshold of Lily's small makeshift bed, her hand hovering, a silent battle raging within her. The ghosts of her own abandonment, her own profound losses whispered in the shadows, creating a formidable barrier to true empathy. Yet, in the quiet depths of the night, when the wind rattled the panes and the world outside seemed to hold its breath, a faint stirring began within her, a nascent, almost imperceptible shift in the hard landscape of her heart, propelled not by sentiment, but by the relentless, unassuming presence of a child who simply was. The unexpected knock came weeks later, a jarring intrusion into the fragile, almost monastic routine Alara had established with Lily. It was Elias. He stood there, a specter against the fading light, his face etched deeper with desperation, a fresh bruise blooming on his cheekbone, a testament to the harsh world he inhabited beyond Alara's reluctant sanctuary. He didn't beg this time. His words were clipped, terse, stripped bare of any embellishment. He spoke of injury, of being unable to work, of the impossibility of finding warmth anywhere else. Alara's eyes narrowed, a storm brewing in their depths. The initial shock gave way to a cold, familiar rage. This was the man who had shattered her world, who had made choices that had forever altered the trajectory of her own existence. To allow him back into her space, even on the periphery, was to invite chaos, to disturb the carefully constructed peace she had fought for. Yet Lily stirred in the next room, a faint cough echoing, a reminder of the delicate life dependent on Elias's continued survival, a life dependent on her grudging benevolence. A complicated tangle of resentment and something else, something akin to a dark, twisted obligation warred within Alara. She saw the desperation in his eyes, not just for himself, But for Lily, a silent acknowledgement of his failings as a provider, a father, a man. He had nowhere else to go, and Alara knew it with a certainty that chilled her to the bone. This knowledge, rather than eliciting pity, fueled a bitter, almost savage satisfaction. This was Elias, reduced to begging, a mirror image of the desperate soul he had left her to become, years ago. The unspoken history between them hung heavy in the frigid air, a palpable force. It was in the way Elias avoided her gaze, the way her own jaw clenched, 100 unspoken accusations festering between them. There was no warmth, no welcome, only a stark, brutal necessity. She finally stepped aside, not with an invitation but with a curt, dismissive gesture. "Just for a few days," she gritted out, her voice a low growl, "until you can fend for yourself, and don't think this changes anything." The words were a warning, a line drawn in the sand, yet the act itself was a breach, a violation of the solitude she cherished. Elias nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the precariousness of his position, the weight of his past failures. He entered, a shadow crossing the threshold, bringing with him not just the chill of the outside world, but the chilling echoes of their shared, fractured history, now condensed and confined within the four walls of Alara's solitary existence. Elias's presence in the small cottage was a constant grating friction, a dissonant note in the quiet symphony of Alara's life. He moved with a hesitant deference, like a ghost, yet his very breathing felt like an intrusion. The air in the cottage, once clean and crisp, now felt thick with unspoken words, with the heavy sediment of old grievances. Alara found herself on edge, every movement, every glance, charged with a subtle hostility. Their dialogue, sparse as it was a masterclass in subtext, each clipped sentence carrying the weight of years of unresolved pain. "Did you ever think of her?" Alara might ask, not about Lily, but about another, lost possibility. Her words sharp as broken glass slicing through the mundane. Elias would flinch, a muscle in his jaw tightening, and respond with a vague, non-committal murmur, a testament to his own enduring guilt. He knew the question wasn't truly about memory, but about accountability. Their past wasn't a simple story of love lost. It was a complex tapestry woven with threads of poverty, impossible choices, and desperate betrayals. Flashbacks, like sudden, vivid bursts of lightning, illuminated fragments of their shared history. A desperate argument in the rain, a promise broken, a choice made out of perceived necessity that had cleaved their lives apart. Alara remembered the biting cold of that winter, the gnawing hunger, the impossible decision Elias had faced, and the way he had chosen ultimately to save himself, leaving her to fend for herself, pregnant and alone. The memory was a bitter poison, festering in her heart, transforming love into a hard, unforgiving shell. Now he was here, a living, breathing reminder of that agony, reduced to this, to begging, to relying on her grudging mercy. The irony was a cruel joke. He had once left her to perish, and now he was at her mercy. Yet even in her bitterness, a part of her, a deeply buried, almost unrecognizable part, acknowledged the profound shift in his circumstances, the mirroring of their past desperation in his present state. Lily, a quiet observer, seemed to sense the immense tension, her innocent gaze flitting between them, her presence a fragile bridge over the chasm of their unresolved anger. Elias attempted to help with chores with Lily, small gestures of penitence, but Alara rebuffed them, her movements sharp, her face a mask of cold rejection. She wouldn't let him off so easily. The bitterness was a shield, protecting her from the pain of vulnerability, from the terrifying possibility of caring again, of being hurt again. The cottage was not a home. It was a holding pen for two deeply wounded souls, tethered by an innocent child and the ghosts of a devastating past, locked in a silent, agonizing dance of unresolved grievance. Lily's quiet resilience began to work its subtle magic, chipping away at the fortress Alara had so meticulously built around her heart. In the presence of such pure, unadulterated need, Alara found her practiced indifference faltering. She noticed the small tremors in Lily's hands, the way her eyes would light up at a gentle touch, the profound vulnerability in her inability to fend for herself. Without consciously realizing it, Ilara's movements around Lily softened. Her voice, though still gruff, held a fraction less edge. She found herself anticipating Lily's needs, a quiet attentiveness growing in her. It was not a sudden burst of affection, but a slow, almost geological shift, like ice melting in glacial time. Elias, witnessing these small changes, saw a glimmer of the woman he once knew, the woman beneath the layers of bitterness. He tried to bridge the gap, to speak of the past, to offer tentative apologies, but Ilara met his attempts with a wall of cold silence or sharp, dismissive retorts. "Don't pretend," she'd snap, her voice laced with venom, "that words fix what you broke." Her anger was a carefully guarded flame, fueled by years of solitude and the deep ache of betrayal. There was no easy forgiveness, no simple path to reconciliation. The house was a pressure cooker, the air thick with the weight of unsaid things. Outside the village, a collection of judgmental eyes and wagging tongues began to murmur. Ilara, once a reclusive oddity, was now the subject of gossip. She took in his child, the whispers began, loaded with implied histories, with societal biases against those who lived outside their rigid norms. Secondary characters, the shopkeeper with his pursed lips, the gossiping women at the well, the men who eyed Elias with suspicion, embodied the narrow-mindedness of their world, their judgment a constant low hum in the background. They saw Ilara as a fallen woman, Elias as a vagrant, and Lily as a burden, a symbol of their sins. This external pressure, the community's disdain, paradoxically, began to forge an unspoken alliance, however fragile, between Ilara and Elias. They were outsiders, bound by circumstance, by Lily, and by a past that refused to stay buried. Ilara found herself instinctively defending Lily, and by extension, even Elias, against the villagers' thinly veiled scorn, a primal protectiveness overriding her personal animosity. The quiet care she showed Lily, the way she shielded the child from the harsh realities of their world, was a testament to the slow, relentless erosion of her hardened heart, a crack forming in the impenetrable facade she had maintained for so long, allowing a sliver of unexpected humanity to seep through. The outside world, with its narrow judgments and harsh realities, began to press in, threatening the fragile, tense truce within Ilara's cottage. The whispers of the villagers escalated into pointed remarks, then outright confrontations. Elias, venturing into the village for dwindling supplies, was met with hostility, refused service, his presence an unwelcome stain on their carefully cultivated normalcy. Rumors, venomous and unfounded, circulated about Lily's parentage, about Elias's supposed past crimes, about Ilara's supposed promiscuity. The community, these stereotypical societal figures of righteous indignation, saw them as an affront, a moral blight to be excised. One particularly brutal afternoon, a local official, a man of rigid beliefs and limited compassion, arrived at Ilara's door. His words were polite but chilling, questioning Lily's welfare, hinting at better care in an institution, a veiled threat to remove the child. This external threat, so cold and bureaucratic, ignited a furious protective instinct in Ilara that surprised even herself. This wasn't just about Lily. It was about autonomy, about defying the world that had always sought to control and condemn her. Elias, witnessing the scene, stepped forward, his body tense, a primal growl rumbling in his chest. For a moment they stood shoulder to shoulder, a united front against the encroaching darkness, their shared history temporarily eclipsed by an immediate, common enemy. The official, taken aback by their unexpected solidarity, retreated, but his words hung in the air like a pall, a grim prophecy. The confrontation served as a brutal catalyst, forcing Ilara and Elias to confront not just the villagers, but the very source of their own deep-seated animosity. The immediate danger to Lily, the threat of losing her to the cold, impersonal clutches of the system, ripped open the old wounds between them, forcing them to acknowledge the interconnectedness of their fates. There was no longer the luxury of silence, of lingering resentment. The stakes were too high. This moment of shared peril, this united stand against a world that sought to break them, became the crucible in which their long-suppressed past would finally be forged into confession, into agonizing truth. The air crackled, not just with the chill of the outside, but with the building static of a storm about to break within the small, crowded cottage, demanding a reckoning that could no longer be deferred. The confrontation came, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating force of a whispered truth finally unearthed. The fear of losing Lily had stripped away their defenses, leaving them raw and exposed. That evening, after the official had left, Elias found Ilara staring out the window, her back to him, her shoulders rigid with suppressed emotion. He began to speak, his voice hoarse, broken, no longer attempting to deflect or deny. He spoke of the desperate winter, of the hunger that gnawed at his insides, of the impossible choice he had faced. He confessed his betrayal, not as an excuse, but as a plea for understanding, a confession of profound weakness in the face of insurmountable odds. He had chosen survival, his own survival, abandoning her, the woman carrying his unborn child, to the harsh whims of a merciless world. He spoke of his regret, a lifetime of it, a gnawing guilt that had pursued him through every desolate turn. Ilara listened, her silence a heavy, oppressive presence. Every word was a razor's edge, slicing open old wounds she had painstakingly tried to close. The memory of the snow, the cold, the sheer terror of being alone, pregnant, and utterly destitute flooded her. She turned, her eyes blazing with a mixture of pain, rage, and a flicker of something else, something akin to understanding, however begrudging. "You left me to die," she spat, her voice a low, fierce hiss, each word a hammer blow. "You chose yourself. You chose to live knowing I would perish, knowing our child might perish." The revelation was not new information, but the raw articulation of it, the stark intimacy of the confession in their shared space, was devastating. Her child, the one she had lost, the one whose memory she carried like a phantom limb, was the ultimate manifestation of his betrayal. This was the core wound, the reason for her moral ambiguity, her hardened shell. She had not chosen to become this way. She had been forged in the crucible of his abandonment, his profound act of self-preservation. Tears, hot and bitter, finally tracked paths down her weathered cheeks, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in decades. Elias, tears in his own eyes, stepped forward, reaching out, but she flinched away. The pain too fresh, too overwhelming. The truth was out, laid bare between them, a jagged, unforgiving chasm. It was the emotional climax, not of a romance, but of a long, torturous process of confronting a devastating past. A moment of stark, brutal honesty that left them both utterly shattered, yet paradoxically, free from the suffocating weight of untold secrets. The immediate aftermath of the confession was a deafening silence, heavier than any words. The air in the cottage crackled with the residual static of raw emotion, like the calm after a violent thunderstorm. Ilara stood trembling, exhausted, the decades of suppressed grief and anger having finally erupted, leaving her hollowed out. Elias, equally undone, sat slumped on the worn floorboards, his face buried in his hands, the weight of his revealed past pressing down on him. There was no immediate forgiveness, no easy embrace of reconciliation. The wounds were too deep, too freshly exposed. Yet something had fundamentally shifted. The open wound, though agonizing, was no longer festering beneath the surface. The truth, however brutal, had a cleansing quality, washing away the layers of unspoken resentment and poisoned assumption. The cottage, once a prison of Ilara's solitude, now felt like a fragile vessel, adrift on a vast, uncertain sea. Lily miraculously had slept through the storm, her peaceful breathing a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil that had consumed her parents. Her innocent presence was a silent anchor, a stark reminder of the reason they were forced to confront such painful truths. Ilara, in her brokenness, found herself drawn to Lily's crib, her gaze lingering on the small, fragile form. The child was not just Elias's burden, but her own, a delicate responsibility that demanded a choice. The path of continued bitterness was familiar, safe in its isolation, but it felt suffocating, unbearable in the wake of the catharsis. The alternative was terrifying, a terrifying leap towards a future undefined, fraught with the immense challenge of rebuilding something from the ashes of betrayal. She had to choose, and in that moment, seeing Lily, so vulnerable, so completely dependent, Ilara made a choice. It wasn't about Elias, not entirely. It was about herself, about finally breaking the chains of a past that had defined her, suffocated her, turned her into something she no longer recognized. It was a choice born not of love, but of a fierce, desperate yearning for release, for a different kind of ending. The dawn, when it finally broke, cast long, pallid shadows through the window, revealing the physical exhaustion on both their faces. The dark emotional tone of the preceding days had not vanished, but a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer of hope, like a distant lighthouse beacon, now flickered on the horizon, promising a possibility, however faint, of healing and a fragile, tentative peace. The days that followed were a testament to the quiet, arduous work of tentative repair. The air in the cottage, though still heavy with the echoes of their shared pain, now allowed for a different kind of silence, one of contemplation, of unspoken understanding, rather than simmering resentment. Ilara, though still guarded, no longer met Elias's gaze with outright hostility. Her movements, once sharp and dismissive, had gained a subtle softness, particularly when dealing with Lily. She found herself speaking to Elias in full sentences, discussing Lily's needs, the scarce resources, the looming threats from the village. It wasn't reconciliation in the traditional sense, but a functional truce, born of necessity and a shared protective instinct for the child who had unwittingly brought them back together. Elias, for his part, was perpetually watchful, always offering help, never demanding, his every action an unspoken plea for atonement. He fetched water, chopped wood, his quiet industry a stark contrast to the broken man who had arrived begging. The community, those stereotypical figures of gossip and judgment, continued their whispers, their condemning glances. They saw the father still there, the disabled child, the hardened woman, and confirmed their own biases, solidifying their narrative of a morally dubious household. But inside the cottage, their judgment mattered less. Ilara, now more fiercely protective than ever, began to disregard the narrow confines of their village's moral code. She cared for Lily, truly cared, and in that simple, profound act, she found a sliver of her own lost humanity. She saw not just Lily, but the fragile innocence that had once been her own, before the world, and Elias, had hardened her. She started to speak of the future, not grand plans, but small, tangible hopes. Enough food for the winter, a sturdier roof, a way to protect Lily from the world's harshness. These were not the dreams of a heartbroken girl, but the practical, grounded aspirations of a woman who had survived, and who now, against all odds, chose to tend a fragile flame of hope. The dark, tense emotional tone that had dominated their lives began to recede, replaced by a quiet, determined resilience. The scars remained, etched deep into the fabric of their lives, but they were no longer open wounds. They were becoming, slowly, agonizingly, markers of survival, testament to a harrowing journey, hinting at the profound, if painful, possibility of a different future. Life in the hollow, though still harsh and unforgiving, settled into a rhythm that, for the first time in decades, held a fragile promise of permanence for Ilara. The cottage, once a monument to her solitude, now hummed with the quiet presence of three souls bound by a complex tapestry of past hurt and future hope. Lily, growing stronger with Ilara's meticulous, if still gruff care, became a beacon. Her small smiles, rare and precious, were like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, warming the cold corners of Ilara's heart. Ilara had fundamentally changed. The hardened shell hadn't vanished entirely, but it had cracked, allowing a deeper, more profound capacity for care and a quiet, fierce protectiveness to emerge. She was still Ilara, shaped by the desolate years, but she was also something more, a guardian, a reluctant matriarch, a woman who had chosen the arduous path of compassion over the easier road of perpetual bitterness. Elias, forever marked by his past choices, remained. He worked tirelessly, a silent, unwavering presence, his every action a quiet act of penitence. He knew he could never fully erase the pain he had inflicted, but he could perhaps build something new, something that honored the difficult lessons learned. Their relationship was not one of renewed love, but of a deeper, more grounded understanding, forged in the fires of shared suffering and the profound responsibility they now bore for Lily. The memory of the lost child, the daughter Alara had grieved for so long, still lingered, a quiet echo in the empty spaces of her past, but it no longer consumed her. Lily, in her fragile innocence, offered a different kind of resolution, a living testament to the enduring power of life itself. The societal figures of the village still cast their long shadows of judgment, their whispers a constant low hum in the background, but Alara no longer cared. She had found her own truth, her own difficult path to redemption, outside the confines of their narrow-minded world. The ending was not a fairy tale, not a grand, dramatic flourish. It was grounded, realistic, imbued with the quiet strength of survival and the slow, steady process of healing. The dark emotional tones had lifted, replaced by a profound sense of fragile hope, a quiet triumph in the face of immense adversity. Alara looked at Lily, then at Elias, a man forever bound to her by a shared sorrow and a shared future. The scars remained, visible and deep, but they were no longer bleeding. They were simply a part of the story, a testament to the harrowing journey they had survived together, now bound by the fragile, enduring thread of a little girl's unwavering hope.